Because of why I search the deep through endless nights, no time to sleep. The call inside I can't deny. I'll find the light because of why.
Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some of the big ideas that, well, literally shaped our world.
You've probably seen images just like this one, right? For centuries, this has been the picture of America. Arrival, hope, a massive journey. I mean, think about it. Millions of people literally left everything they knew to cross this huge, dangerous ocean, all for a shot at a new life.
But it was never that simple. It wasn't just a casual choice. There were these incredibly powerful forces at work. So that gets us to the big question we're tackling today. What was pushing people out of their homes? And what was the magnetic pull that drew them all the way across the Atlantic? All right, let's get right into it. To really wrap our heads around this huge movement of people, we need to look at two sides of the same story. First, what was going on in Europe that made people leave? And second, what was the promise of America that pulled them in? And this whole idea is actually pretty simple. It boils down to something called push and pull factors. So push factors are all the bad things, right? The stuff that makes you say, I have to get out of here. We're talking war, starvation, being persecuted for your beliefs. And then pull factors, well, those are the good things. The attractions of a new place, like the promise of freedom or a chance to actually make a good living. And these two forces really were like two sides of the same coin. Over in Europe, you've got these grim realities pushing people away. Religious persecution, poverty, wars, and just no way to improve your life. And then, on the other side, you have America being advertised as the solution to all of it, a place with freedom, tons of land, and a real shot at opportunity. And we're not talking about small problems here. These were huge life or death situations. I mean, just imagine. It's deadly to practice your own faith because of the Protestant Reformation. Or imagine watching your family starve during the Irish potato famine in the 1840s. Even if you got past that, Europe's population was exploding. So land, the one thing that meant security, was basically gone. And on top of all that, constant wars made everyday life incredibly dangerous. Okay, so with all that misery pushing people out, what was so great about America that it pulled them in? See, if Europe was the problem, America was sold as the answer. It wasn't just about running away from something bad, it was about running towards something better, a chance to build a whole new life.
For the early European powers, the main pull factors are famously summed up in just 3 words: God, gold, and glory. That's it. This powerful trio is what drove explorers, funded these massive expeditions, and ultimately built empires across the ocean.
And check out how the historian Will Durant described it. He said people came across the sea not just for land, but to win freedom for their souls. For a huge number of people, this wasn't about money. It was a deeply spiritual journey. But, this whole God motivation, it really had two completely different sides. For groups like the Pilgrims or the Quakers, it was all about escaping religious persecution. They wanted a place where they could worship freely without looking over their shoulder. But for the big European powers, like Spain, God was used as a reason for conquest. It was seen as their duty to convert the indigenous people to Christianity, often by force. All right, next up, gold. The whole economic engine behind this was a system called mercantilism. And the basic idea was pretty brutal. There's only so much wealth in the world. So for us to get richer, we have to take it from someone else. And colonies, they were seen as giant piggy banks, just there to supply raw materials and make the home country richer. And gold meant different things to different people. For a king, it was literally gold and silver, or maybe new trade routes. For big investors, it was cash crops like tobacco and sugar that made them a fortune. But for the average person, the most attractive gold was something much simpler: land. The chance to own your own farm was a pipe dream back in Europe. But in America, with laws like the Homestead Act, it suddenly seemed possible. And that brings us to the final G, glory. You can think of this as a high-stakes game of risk between the superpowers of Europe. Spain, France, England, they were all in it. Claiming new territory wasn't just about getting rich. It was about national pride. It was a flex. This was a flat-out race to see who could build the biggest global empire and dominate the world stage. So, okay, the motivation was there, big time. But for hundreds of years, there was one huge problem. The journey itself was just brutal.
A whole ocean stood in the way. That is until technology changed everything and turned that massive barrier into a bridge. I mean, for the longest time, the trip itself was a total gamble. In the early 1800s, you'd get on a sailing ship and just hope the winds were right. The voyage was long, dangerous, and completely unpredictable. But then came the steamship, and this was a total game changer. By the 1850s, steamships were running on regular schedules, and by the 1870s, pretty much every immigrant was arriving on a steamship. The age of sail was over. Seriously, just try to wrap your head around that. Over 40 days, more than a month, stuck on a crowded, dangerous ship being tossed around in the middle of the Atlantic with absolutely no guarantee you'd even survive the trip. And then, boom, the steamship comes along and cuts that travel time down to just 10 days. Suddenly, the journey goes from being a near-death experience to, well, a long trip. This one piece of technology completely changed the game and made the pull of America accessible to millions more people.
But we have to pause here because it's absolutely critical to understand this next part. This story of hope for Europeans was at the same time a story of absolute catastrophe for the people who were already living here. Europeans did not find an empty continent, and their arrival came at a staggering, almost unimaginable cost. The most devastating weapon the Europeans brought wasn't a gun or a sword. It was disease. This account from an indigenous person describes the horror of smallpox, something they had no immunity against. It's just a horrifying look at what was essentially a biological catastrophe. And the impact was, well, it was apocalyptic. We're talking an estimated 95% decline in the indigenous population within the first 100 years of contact. 95%. Entire civilizations gone, wiped out, not by armies, but by germs they'd never seen before.
So, what's the takeaway here? It's that this history is incredibly complicated. It's a story filled with both courage and cruelty, with freedom and with destruction. The very same forces that pulled millions to a new life also pushed millions of others off their land, and in many cases out of existence. And that leaves us with a really big question to think about. How do those original motives, that search for God, gold, and glory, still echo in America today?
Thanks so much for sticking with us for this explainer. It is obviously a really complex story, and we'd love to hear what you think down in the comments. And hey, if you learned something new, we'd really appreciate it if you'd like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives. We'll see you on the next one.